On August 11th, 2022, exactly 1 year ago, I released my first YouTube video ever, in which I predicted that Tsuburaya Productions' next Ultraman series would be an Ultraman Gaia-themed anniversary show based on the 1998 series. As we all now know, this didn't turn out to be correct, and instead we got Ultraman Blazar, a completely original show, which is currently ongoing. In this video, I'll be going over why this is for the better for the Ultraman franchise, and why I'm glad my prediction was incorrect. That's all next on today's episode of the Toku Professor. It has definitely been an exciting first year for the channel, all thanks to your support, students, and now we're beginning year 2. So I thought, what better way to begin our second year together than by making a sequel to my very first video ever? In this first video, titled What Ultraman Will Follow Trigger and Decker, A New Gaia, I mentioned that I was almost positive that the TDG trend would continue one more year, and that we'd be getting a show themed around a reimagined Ultraman Gaia, possibly called Ultraman Gunner. I'll provide a link to the video in the description. Just be aware that I talk really slow and it's overall just kind of low quality, but you could still watch it, just know that everything I predicted in it didn't happen. Tsuburaya Productions truly did throw Ultraman Gaia under the bus, and went with a totally unique show instead. And aside from the fact that I turned out to be wrong, I couldn't be happier with this decision. In fact, I think it could be the first step in righting the damaged ship that is the Ultraman series. Allow me to elaborate. I'm going to be getting into subjective territory a lot in this video, which I don't usually do since I mostly focus on Kaiju bios. So I think it's a good idea to mention that most of what I'm going to be saying today are my personal opinions, and you are free to disagree with them. In fact, feel free to tell us all exactly why you disagree, or even agree, in the comments, because it'll actually probably help this video out. With that said, let's dive in. I'm not really a fan of the new generation Ultraman shows from Ginga through Z. I don't hate them, I'm actually extremely pleased that they continue to use good old-fashioned costume and city model tokusatsu instead of CGI most of the time for the special effects, and sometimes they do something that makes me really excited, like bring back a monster that hasn't been seen in decades. But I have several major gripes with these shows. I've boiled it down to 3 main ones. First of all, I don't like how most of the human stars of these shows for some reason have to act like kids. This is nothing like most of the OG Ultraman human stars, especially Shin Hayata and Dan Moroboshi, who were strong and quite serious most of the time.
This microphone isn't escaping me!
Though they could of course also be jovial. My second issue with these shows is how they bring back famous Ultraman monsters far too often, to the point that we get tired of seeing them. That should never happen. We should be leaping up with excitement when Red King shows up, and not rolling our eyes because it's the 4th time we've seen him in 5 years. I'd much rather these shows be filled with mostly new kaiju instead, and occasionally sprinkle in a few older ones than bombard us with the classics until we can't stand the sight of them. And then issue number 3 is a pretty obvious one. These series are clearly Bandai propaganda, desperate to sell toys, and it shows. I actually wouldn't have a problem with this if it didn't affect the quality of the shows, but it does. So many episodes have to focus on new weapons and forms and collectibles the Ultramen get, which look like toys because in the real world they are. All of which are always overpowered so that kids want the toy until they aren't, and then the Ultraman gets another one to sell the next toy. Rinse and repeat. Since the start of the series, the Ultraman shows have had a merch-selling aspect to them, but for the longest time most of the focus was on selling monster toys. The Kaiju are what most people like about Ultraman. It's the Kaiju that Bandai should mostly be marketing, and not Kaiju capsules or Kaiju cards or anything gimmicky and cheap like that, just normal figures. If you just make the monsters really interesting and cool, you don't have to turn everything else in the series into toys because kids will like the monsters and thus want the toys. My childhood is proof that this strategy works. There are a few other problems I have with these shows, but these are the main ones. In 2021, Ultraman Trigger came along, and then Ultraman Decker followed in 2022, and though they of course did cool and notable things, they somehow worsened all 3 of these issues. We got 2 more somewhat childish antagonists, one of which had one of the cringiest catchphrases I've ever heard.
Smile, smile.
Can you imagine that coming out of Dan Moroboshi's mouth? Not only were almost all the monsters featured in these shows famous ones we'd seen recently, but the new ones they did have were just redesigned versions of Tiga and Dyna monsters, meaning we had nothing very new to look forward to in the kaiju department. And since these shows were based entirely on older series, they brought how far the Ultra series had fallen quality-wise into the light. Because when a show is based on another older show, you can't help but compare them. And upon doing so in this case, it becomes immediately apparent that these new shows just want to sell toys! Ah! Before, maybe you could ignore it, but now, upon comparing the classic Tiga with Trigger or Dyna with Decker, how can you possibly look past this? And this? And this? If you grew up with Tiga and Dyna, I wouldn't blame you at all for saying that Trigger and Decker were demakes, not remakes. Again, please remember I don't hate the shows, just pointing out some pretty big flaws with them. Despite these issues, I think I'd be okay if Tsuburaya just did Trigger and then moved on. But then they did Decker too, and even though I actually like Decker better than Trigger, I think 2 remakes in a row was just too much. And there were signs pointing to yet another remake coming out after Decker, a new generation Gaia. Now, was Tsuburaya Productions actually planning this? I don't know, but my guess is they were, but then they realized there were a lot of people like me who were by now quite bored with the status quo and wanted something new. And so far, that's exactly what they've given us. Only 5 episodes of Ultraman Blazar have aired as of the time I am writing this script, but as of right now, the show is nearly completely devoid of most of the problems present not just in Trigger and Decker, but in the whole new generation era. It features a strong 30-year-old as the human star, who is actually the captain of his squad and is pretty serious. Side note, I have nothing wrong with occasional silliness and less serious moments in Ultraman shows, or characters growing to be more mature. It's just mainly childish behavior that bothers me. So far, nearly all the Kaiju are brand new and unique for the first time since Ultraman Max, and the 2 old ones slated to reappear have not been present in the main series for decades. And as of right now, other than Blazar's transformation device, which most Ultraman shows have, the show is so far basically toy-free, and Bandai is instead concentrating on selling toys of the Kaiju with their new Ultra Monster Advance line. I still can't believe that Ultraman Blazar still only has 1 form. It's amazing. The series isn't perfect, but overall this show is, so far, a big step in the right direction. You could tell Tsuburaya wanted to go for something a little more mature with this series just by listening to Blazar's voice, which, though weird, has character and I like it. But the show's also still appropriate for kids, who we of course want to enjoy the show as well. Maybe I'm speaking too soon, but as of right now I feel safe in saying that Ultraman Blazar is better than a new generation Gaia could ever be. I'm sure there are some disappointed Gaia fans out there, but if you're one of them, did you really want a lower quality toy-selling series that just retreads old ground? I'm sure you'll agree we needed something fresh to revive the sleepwalking Ultraman series, and so far we're getting it. We don't need Ultraman Giver, Ultraman Grabber, Ultraman Grinder, or Ultraman Gopher. We need Ultraman Blazar. Don't let us down, sir. Keep up the good episodes. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let's make year number 2 a great one. I'm going to be taking a 2-week vacation from making videos to prepare for this next semester, but I certainly won't be slacking off during this time. I'm planning on doing a bunch of research on Red King during this time to get ready for my giant History of Red King video later this year, and listing new Toku toys on my eBay account. And then when I return to the classroom, I'll be coming out swinging with a History of Baragon from the Gamera series video that you won't want to miss. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And with all that being said, I will see you next time. This has been the Toku Professor, signing off.